Now you're very welcome back. So we have been long overdue a visit from our next guest, Mr. Paul Rouse. You are very welcome. Hello.
Thanks, William. Joe, how are you?
Great. The only way we get you in these days is when you have a book to plug. So here we are. Sport in Modern Irish Life. This is a series of essays, stories, observations. The sleeve of the book tells me it is an attempt to capture the sheer variety of experiences available in sport. Is that a pretty good summary of what you're trying to do here?
Yeah, I am. And it's very personal in that respect because, well, any book that anybody ever writes is ultimately an exercise in self-indulgence. You decide what you want to put in and what you want to leave out, and this book in particular is an exercise in self-indulgence. I started it during the lockdown when I've had the great privilege to work for the Irish Examiner for the last 7 or 8 years to write a column for them, and I've loved doing it. And in the course of that, I probably have written 600,000 words over the course of 8 years, and I just started going back through those and picking out things that I thought were okay and using that as the basis to write a book. And it was something that I thought, I'm just going to enjoy myself. I don't really care if anyone publishes this. I'm just going to, for myself, try and see if I can put something together using those bits and pieces, using new things that I wrote and researched for it, just as a way of passing time, if truth be told. And it was, fortunately, in the end, Merriam Press did decide that it was worth publishing. There weren't, by the way, other people didn't want to publish it, so it's not like there was a guarantee in it.
It wasn't a bidding war.
There was no bidding war. But I really, really enjoyed doing it. Okay. It's totally different than what I've done before. Before I've written history books, and this is not really a history book. There are bits of history in it, but it's about modern sport, and it's about, I suppose, my understanding of modern sport.
Yes. It's full of vignettes and standalone thoughts and observations, and this is an interesting thing that tends to happen without any great conclusion. But I suppose the cumulative weight of it all just by definition gives a sense of, God, there is such variety to what sport means in the country.
I never like books or articles or radio stations which present me with a neat box of opinions readily formed in which somebody tells me how I should think. I like someone to make me think, and to say things that are interesting and to assemble them in particular ways. But I never believe a story that's neatly packaged, because I always end up thinking about what has somebody left out.
Yes.
What are the bits that have been inconvenient here to the neat telling of this story that we're going to leave to one side? And I really believe that no book should have a conclusion. Obviously a novel often has to have a conclusion. Not always, but often. And you do want to find out what happens to people, but I think history books that finish with conclusions are, relatively speaking, unconvincing. And similarly, sociology books or explorations of what's happening in our world. I mean, who can really offer a conclusion to the change that's happening in our world at the moment?
Well, indeed. So if you writing a book is an indulgence, can I just be indulged for a brief moment to give an example of one of the little vignettes? And this one just goes across 2 or 3 pages, but I saw Dollymount Strand, and I'm in that neck of the woods routinely. I spend a lot of time on Dollymount Strand, and you actually captured something which has occurred to me, but I haven't really verbalised or strung it all together as such, and given it, the kind of coherent thought that you had. So, again, anyone who knows Dollymount Strand, on the Howth Road, you take a right turn over the wooden bridge, and on a windy day, as you drive over the wooden bridge, you will see on the Strand the kites, because kite surfing there is a huge attraction, hugely popular between March and November. And you make the point it's a rejection of the formal world of sport, and that the participants have organised themselves as more of a community as opposed to a club, and there just is a nod and a wink and how you doing, and they've started to get to know each other, and it's that kind of a community, and they're not competing against each other. It's just for the sheer joy of participating. And then you also note the iconic, and people will know them, the modernist yellow bathing shelters. built in 1930s Dublin by the corporation. Beautiful in their own way. Like, I've got great affection for them, and again, it's maybe the intention was it would be just for the scorching summer days, but actually you go there every single day of the year, you'll meet someone, and I routinely go there and I talk to strangers there. And it's this lovely hub, not least for men who aren't so good at that, where it starts off with the, how's the water today? And within a minute, that person you're chatting to is explaining the stress they're under, or the medical condition being the reason as to why they're swimming, and it can, you know, you may never see them again, and it's that lovely thing. And it's all very free. And then 30 yards away from the bathing shelter is Royal Dublin Golf Club, and I would suggest hello money could be in the region of 15 or 20k just to get in the door, and there's a big private property sign. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd love to be in there as well. I love my golf, and so that's this lovely, like, that, to give people a sense of this book. That's a lovely 2-3 page vignette, a passing moment on a Saturday, just one particular spot, and just all the wonderful array of ways which sport has its fingerprints all over this one little beach.
It's, so for people who don't know Dollymount Strand, it's in Dublin Bay, and it's on North Bull Island on the way out to Holt, just past Clontarf. And it didn't exist 200 years ago. So the port walls were built, the Bull Wall was built north and south, and on that there was an accumulation of what was a sandbank, and it grew into an island, and it still is growing out into the sea. It's about 800 metres wide at its largest point and about 5 kilometres long. Now, it matters, I think, for a variety of different reasons. That idea of formal leisure place to play. Brendan Behan described it many years ago as Dublin's Riviera, the place where inner city Dublin emptied out to go to the seaside in that great Victorian tradition from the end of the 19th century onwards, and remade a sporting world and a world of a beach culture out along that place, which is one aspect to it. And that has constantly evolved over the years. But it was originally owned not by Dublin City as it is owned now, although it's partially owned by Dublin Port still, who own the Bull Wall, but the rest of it is owned by Dublin City, apart from the area that's owned by the golf club. So this is where the great gift of doing something that's so self-indulgent, that things happen from it. I tried to write about Royal Dublin, and I contacted Royal Dublin to see their minute books and to look at their records, because Royal Dublin was the oldest golf club in what is now the south of Ireland and Republic of Ireland. It was founded actually when laid out first of all in the Phoenix Park in 1885, and then it had rooms on Grafton Street just down from us here, and then moved out first to Sutton, and then from the 1889 to that area that it kind of ended up colonising along there. So I contacted them, and eventually a brilliant guy out there, Shane Darby, contacted me and invited me 3 weeks ago to go and play around out there, which was quite a distressing experience for those who had to witness the swing that was involved, but it was a really, really enjoyable.
I didn't have the missed call from you. You must have.
Yeah. Funny. I'll tell you. Yeah, it's, you would have been much better sorted by going out there, and I really enjoyed it. But it's a reminder that this is space that is private space. In what the rest of it is public land. So you have 2 golf courses out there, St Anne's at one end and Royal Dublin in the other, and they own more than 1/5 of the island between them. What is also out there is Ireland's first ever bird sanctuary, which was there from the 1930s. And then you have those informal structures built by Dublin Corporation, as you say, for swimming in. So you have a whole load of different things going on there. You have nature conservation, you have a private golf course, 2 private golf courses, and you have a public recreational space, and the 3 things are not compatible in a small area. So there's a tension between the 3 of them, particularly as environmentalism has grown. And how do you manage those 3 things is really difficult in a city island, even if it is growing. It's not growing quickly enough to accommodate everything, and it's a constant challenge to manage those various different things, and it leads to disagreement. And it shows you also on that island how sport has changed. you know the way that there's that modern sport of clay pigeon shooting as kind of, it's in the Olympics, or at least, and they send them out and they shoot them. That used to take place on the North Bull Island 100 years ago, except they used live birds. They let the birds free, they flew them up, and it wasn't just pigeons, they shot everything that they could possibly find. That was there. As recently as the 1950s and into the 1960s, the Dublin Coursing Club used to bag hares off the island to be chased by dogs in the place. There are now no hares left. It is a symbol of the Bull Island, the hare is, but it's gone from there.
Yeah.
The fish, I'm not necessarily sure that if I fished off Dollymount Strand, I would necessarily want to eat that fish. That's been brutal about it. And swimming off it, there are days when you swim off that where it's not great.
Oh, it's a disgrace. I mean, I raised that with Neil Martin actually when he was in studio here a couple of years ago. There are too many parts of the country whereby if it has rained heavily the day before, don't go swimming, is the brutal truth, because there's been a spillage.
And this comes again to investment in sewage infrastructure. I say this as the son of a water engineer, so this comes from investment in sewage infrastructure and in basic systems of water supply. But we do, of course, have an issue because we have to pay for, through taxation, through the development of these services, and that's not easy to organise or to encourage people to pay for.
No, to say the least. So look, that's just one indulgence on my part. It caught my eye across this book, these array of topics. You said it's quite a personal book, so you are a son of Offaly and you came through from a sporting point of view at a bloody good time as well. So how did that shape you? Because I know you touch on that in the book.
Oh, it was an amazing time to be young and growing up in Offaly. When you think about it now, this county with a population of 60,000 people was competing. For example, when I was 11 in 1981, Offaly played in the All-Ireland football and hurling finals, winning the hurling and losing to Kerry in the football. Come back the following year, robbed by Kilkenny in the Leinster final in 1982 in hurling, but beat the Kerry team that was going for 5 in a row in the 82 final. Now the footballers have only won one Leinster championship since then, but the hurlers went on to win in 85, win in 94, win in 98, and these are days of splendour for a small county to win in either code at any grade is extraordinary at that stage, and to win in both codes growing up was an incredible thing. And I had a cousin, Charlie Conroy, who was on the 82 panel. He played in the 81 final. He was a brilliant footballer, and as things turned out, my mum is from Rode and my granddad was from Rode and played in the first Offaly team that had been fielded in Offaly minor team from 1928. He was a selector on the Offaly team in 69 that got to an All-Ireland final. And so you're brought up in this world where sport meant Gaelic games in a formal sense, because that was the only formal sport I played before I was 17. But in the school and in our local area, like where I lived in Durham, within Tullamore Parish, but on the road between Kilbeggan and Tullamore is a local farm area, and every evening we'd meet up, Lynch's and O'Brien's and Lynham's and Daly's, and pour into a field and play anything depending on what was going on. Play rugby, play soccer, played cricket. There was a local cricket club. We used to liberate some of their equipment to use in the evenings. During the Tour de France, we'd have cycling races around the area. So we recreated that formal world of sport in our informal rural parish. All the way through the 80s, and it was a brilliant time. So you have the formal and the informal, and it was a joy, I think.
Yes, I mean, it already sounds just beautiful, and I'm imagining nice summer evenings as well to go with it.
It never rained, I think. In my memory, it never rained.
I hear you. I wonder, the latest generation having those seasonal flirtations with golf during the Open or pitch and putt during the Open, and then bikes during the Tour de France, and because there's endless bandwidth on the internet. If you're into one sport, you can just go very deep in that and ignore everything else, whereas we took what we could get at the time and then we indulged accordingly.
Yeah, I think the availability of formal ways to play those sports is much greater now than it was. So it's not just that you see them all the time now. You can actually more or less get into that diversity of experience fairly early, if that's how you want to go. I will say there's a lot spoken about kids, and it's really interesting. I think I go back to my old school in Coláiste in Tullamore every so often, and was Tullamore CBS when I was there, and it really struck me the extent to which kids are very, very similar to the way we were when we were in that school, nicely abusive to anyone who might consider themselves having something to say to them, and I mean that in a slagging way. They're great kids, really, it's really enjoyable to chat them. But the one thing that's different, of course, is the most obvious thing of all, which is the phone, which is transforming our world, transforming society, and is only at the early stages of this, and we haven't got close to understanding how it is changing human behaviour. We know that it is transforming human behaviour because of the way in which algorithms are used to shape behaviours and to push people in certain directions and to send them down particular cul-de-sacs in a form of extractive capitalism, which is how these companies make money. So we know it is changing behaviour, but allowing for that, I don't see the kids who are in the school that I was in as being enormously different than I and the group of friends that I had were in that school.
Well, that's a reassuring thought for.
And some of the teachers are still there, which I really like.
And you're realising, how young were you when you thought, if you're still here now? I guess and you do talk about that elemental pleasure of participation, the joy of kicking a ball or catching or striking a golf ball, or you name it. It's such an aspect of sport that watching it provides such pleasure and escapism, reading about it, talking about it, debating it. I think you made the observation that if you took away work and sleep, and I presume the general chit-chat that goes on around the immediacy of family life and who has to be where and who has to be picked up, what do we talk about the most? I mean, aside from the week that's been, where I have a fair sense what people were talking about the most, in the main sports, probably up there for a large quotient to society. For an awful lot of people, it's what drives the world, both local sport, national sport and international sport. It's the endless churn of sport. Yeah, I'd say WhatsApp groups, if you could somehow extract the topic percentage for a lot of them. It's massive, and it's a huge engine of conversation in people's lives and within families of all. And we have had a look at a world without sport, and it was at the start of the pandemic when everything shut down, and what it meant to people's lives. People, so many houses, or many houses, are built on the capacity of people to go training. It is an outlet for people to go training, to go and do matches, to go to matches. And I know certainly for my kids, for example, not having that was very, very strange. And this is a house where what was then an 11-year-old boy who thought that Ludo was a contact sport. So you can see when that stopped, when that was taken away, there was no outlet. Now, there are people who will say, well, good, like might make you think of something else, or to push down different avenues, which ultimately seem to me to involve baking banana bread or talking about baking banana bread. And that, to me, it was no substitute, obviously, but it showed what a hold sport had. And even when sport slowly came back, the fact that it slowly came back. I remember actually training the girls' Gaelic football team in Dublin, and after a couple of weeks, we got organised and we did Zoom training sessions with
athletics fitness and gave them out. We went around and gave everyone a ball who didn't have a ball and set out a practice regime for them. And it was something, but it was no substitute for the collective, being in the same place, in a club, meeting other people, and all that does. It's not. I don't believe sport is inherently good at all. I don't buy that in any shape or form. I wouldn't be blasé about it. I wouldn't be complacent about it. I don't see it as fixing society's ills. I don't believe in the line that, if a kid keeps playing sport, they won't go too far wrong. That's self-evidently not true. There are too many examples of where that isn't the case. Allowing for that, it brings so much colour and joy and interest and focus to people's lives that it is fundamental.
Well, particularly as society continues to evolve along most recent lines, to have something which brings people together when they wouldn't be together otherwise is going to be more powerful than ever.
And do you mean by that the manner in which of isolation?
Yeah.
Because of
sitting in a room on the internet being spoon-fed nonsense. And there's a degree of going training, talking to other people and being brought back to reality a touch.
It's funny, I was talking to the summer school on in UCD at the moment, and I was talking to a load of American students who are here from Big Ten. The Big Ten universities are here in a program in UCD at the moment, and I was talking to them. It was meant to be a class about the troubles, which it did turn into, but in the first point we ended up talking about this idea of information and evidence and how you separate truth from fiction, how you recognise propaganda for what it is. And it's really, really difficult, and it's very difficult to teach it. And I do think that literacy in information studies should be fundamental to primary schools and secondary schools now, and people should be able to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. And we understand that even supposedly reputable organisations need not necessarily be producing true stuff at the moment. But in the round, there are reputable sources of information and disreputable ones. And then there are people who just simply lie, and lie routinely, lie repeatedly for their own propaganda in terms of political causes or to make money through commercial programs. And it's very, very hard now to distinguish, and it's very easy to be fooled, and it's really easy to make mistakes. And it's funny though, it's kind of not new. I was thinking about this the other day. I wrote a book called Sport in Ireland in 2015, and in the middle of it I wrote a thing about J.A. McAleary being the guy who, while on his honeymoon in Scotland, discovered soccer and brought it to the north, and this was the first match, and that McAleary was the founding father of Irish soccer. And there's a brilliant article that was written 2 years ago by a really nice man from the north whose name has just gone out of my head, and I apologise for that, where he pointed out how entirely wrong I was, and that McAleary's was his own publicist about how he was the founding father of Irish soccer and had been since the 1880s or 1890s, and how we had basically all swallowed it. So it's not new, right? Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation is not new. Mistakes are not new.
Yeah.
What is new is the sheer scale and reach of propaganda, and the fact that online now facilitates individuals who in the previous run of things would be understood to have been spreading bile and hate and disseminating stuff which is clearly aimed at messing with people's lives and causing division, how they have found a home with each other within an online community in a way that would not previously have been the case. It has allowed people to connect with each other, and there are enormous examples of this all across the world.
Yes.
And it's here too.
Well, that's why I think sport is such an extraordinary, borderline unique weapon, because a dressing room and your participation on a team, for instance, to use that more typical formal example of a GAA team or a soccer team, that does not distinguish between your views on the issue of the day. So you're as likely to be down that dirty hole of propaganda if you're good with your right foot as you are if you're not. So you're the echo chamber effect, and you talked about people connecting with each other and then going further down deeper, and the echo chamber continues. Like, what is a dressing room but like just a random collection of the town, where you're exposed to people who don't necessarily share your ideas. And if the route we're going down in macro terms is echo chamber and surround yourself further with people who agree with you, like one of the great, I sit in a dressing room with 10 other people to go, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a great weapon, and not many, I can't think of many other areas of life which will provide that going forward, you know,
it's kind of,
without overextending the importance of sport. But I just mean the image of teenager stuck in his or her bedroom going down bad place and then going to the dressing room and saying, I was reading this thing, and to have the rest of them go, no, come on, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. And you understand always, I think there's two aspects as well that I'd add to that. The first is that you don't, just because you don't agree with somebody on something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a malignant human being.
Of course not. And like the lovely undercurrent there is you're about to go out and play together as a team.
Yeah, and that's it. That's it, exactly. You can fundamentally disagree with somebody over anything.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make you morally just and them entirely malignant. And if you can, generally speaking, you end up, if you spend enough time with someone who you fundamentally disagree with, you can kind of find a common space.
Of course.
Some sort of a common space often. But equally, you have to be unafraid to tell them if you think they were wrong. And I mean, that was such a great spat a few years ago over Brexit and other things between Peter Reid, for example, and Peter Shilton, who shared a dressing room in the World Cup, went on tour together with England, and Peter Reid, who just got stuck into him, Shilton, for the nonsense that he was spouting. But it was done in a kind of it was done in a I won't say a respectful way, because Shilton was spouting such nonsense that you had to kind of call it out fairly brutally. Yeah. But it wouldn't have been possible if they hadn't had that shared space in the dressing room. Yeah. And it could have descended into something much worse. And again, you don't have to like everyone in the dressing room, but you have to share a common purpose with them, and there's something about that.
Oh, they're for sure. I can't think of too many other vehicles in life that will provide that, not least going forward. Anyway, that's a weighty topic to get into. Identity and sport and modern life, we've talked about that in the past and gone through the history of this country. I know you were with Brian O'Driscoll and Craig Doyle and David Irwin at the recent Six Nations talking to the Irish team about Ireland's call and anthems. It's funny on the anthem point. So as we start to have these very public conversations now about a united Ireland, someone within the first 2 minutes will say, we need to talk about the anthem. And it's like, I think most of us will go through 1 week to the next without hearing the anthem or thinking about the anthem, except for sporting events. That's not to say the anthem's not important if we don't like sport, but I can't think of another area, maybe the end of nightclubs, notwithstanding. Do they still do it?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there are nightclubs anymore.
Okay, but I can't think there's no other public area where people will routinely be confronted, to use too strong a term, with, say, a new anthem, or the anthem, certainly. So sport and identity, because, I guess since the beginning of time, you were representing a place in sport.
Yeah, so identity, I think about sport in terms not of identity but identities, because you can be so many different things at the same time, which are both local, national and international. It can be representative of gender and of class and of the area from which you come. And so there's a whole load of different things there. In terms of a united Ireland, I disagree with you that there's endless conversation about a united Ireland. I don't think there's any conversation about a united Ireland.
The beginnings.
The beginnings.
We're at the beginnings of public conversation. Would you not agree we are at the beginnings of it?
I think there's a lot of lip service being played on not one political party, including one who makes most hay out of this particular topic, has produced any sort of a plan in relation to what it considers to be a plan for a united Ireland. Nobody has produced any serious agenda by which this might happen, or the form in which it would take. And to be honest with you, fixing the anthem, deciding what anthem to use. I mean, most people in Ireland, I do a thing with students. Actually, it's a really interesting thing to do with students. I ask students, I go 4 lines into the national anthem. I ask them first of all who'd agree with getting rid of the national anthem, and then I go 4 lines or 5 lines into the national anthem. Sinn Féin Fáil Toffee Gallagher Buindar. So what does that mean? And I ask everyone who knows what it means to put up their hand. So people are used to reciting it, but they sing words that they don't know the meaning of in very many instances. So that's in terms of the anthem. So anthems should have meaning, and to be honest, fixing the anthem, fixing the colour of the jersey, fixing the emblem on it, or who picks the team, that will be easy compared to putting together 2 education systems. What happens? What history are you taught? Do you do GCSEs or do you do the junior cert? Do you do Leaving Cert or A levels? What coinage is going to be used? Is there going to be a parliament in Belfast or a parliament in Dublin or a parliament in both places? Will there also be one in Galway or in Cork, and so on? The football and the rugby team is obviously united, but organising 2 soccer teams to play together will be really straightforward. What's played around it, that'll be fine. However,
disagree a touch.
Do you? Why?
I mean,
I'm not saying it's going to be easy, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it's going to be much easier than fixing 2 education, 2 health systems.
Yeah, true. Probably very true, and certainly less important. But I guarantee you, if you're chatting in the pub and people are saying, what bugs you about this unification business, I'm not sure they'll be getting into the vagaries of coinage or GCSE or Leaving Cert or whatever we call the new curriculum. Not that they shouldn't be, by the way, it is important. I'm just saying, I guarantee a lot of people in the first 3 or 4 things that might bug them, they might say, I just fucking hate the new anthem, the Aviva. Listen, have you heard this new anthem? Guarantee you.
No,
it'll be one of the big talking points for forevermore. People still give out about Ireland's call every time it's played.
So well, I'll come back against that.
I'm not saying it's important, but it's just in terms of these the visibility of sport.
Symbols are important, and people's new states, which this would be a new state.
Yeah.
They have always used sport to project their new status, and that's right. But I will say to you, I'll come back to you and I'll say that this will pale beside the idea if somebody has to pay 3 or 4% more income tax in order to fund it. And I'm not saying that they will, just to be clear, before anyone gets upset. Yeah. I'm not saying that they will, but I'll say that it will pale much more. Yeah. It will pale beside that. And
of course it will. I'm not saying people might be right, but I think they'll quickly adjust to, okay, that's just the mundane aspect to live in. But then on a Saturday when they're watching an Irish international, hate that bloody anthem. Be complained about more.
It's funny, James Ryan, who I know you've had on previously, James Ryan wrote a paper in UCD on Ireland's call a couple of years ago, and it's a very particular insight, being a rugby international, most likely future captain, and really just a really smart, genuine, decent human being, and it's excellent, just considered. Yeah. And this is James Ryan, whose great grandfather was in the GPO, and whose great grandfather and great granduncle would have been separated by civil war, and everything to do with that. So it's from with that hinterland to come back towards things. And I think there's a difference between the great swathe of people and people who were extremists on the margins of either side, and you can never ever satisfy everybody. That's the one lesson. Anytime you do anything in public, you understand completely that there are a group of people who think you're an idiot, regardless. Doesn't matter, and you can't worry about that. But the great swathe of people, if you can engage with them and they can see it, even if they disagree with what you're saying, if they can acknowledge that it's a reasonable perspective,
yes,
then I think you're in business.
Well, I think that's very fair. I also agree with that, and I would have great faith in the vast majority of people still. And so, yeah, there are loud voices when it comes to Ireland's call. I dare say the vast majority of people increasingly accept it. It doesn't ruin their day.
Well, I think a way to look at it is you have people on the Irish rugby team and in the Irish rugby squad who consider themselves to be British while living in Ireland, and that's their identity. And they're being asked to sing an anthem which talks about strangers coming from across the sea. They're being asked to stand under a flag where that flag has been associated with a level of violence against their community that is horrendous. And we don't really want to talk about that anymore because we all want to burnish the edges of it and move on and do all of that kind of stuff. But that past is undeniable. And what are we prepared to do to accommodate a different perspective of view? Do we really want unity? What kind of unity do we want? Do we just want majoritarianism? Well, that's been tried on the North disgracefully. And the treatment of nationalists in Northern Ireland was disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful for generations. So what are we going to do? Replicate that? Is that the way we...
I'm not sure we're of a mind to go too far.
Oh no, we don't even want to think about it.
Yeah. So where does that leave us?
It leaves us with people criticising Ireland's call, because now you can regard Ireland's call as musically horrendous if you want.
Yeah.
That's an I like tea, you like coffee conversation, and that's completely fine. But really, the sentiment of it.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Like, there's a difference between disliking the song.
What percentage do you think are more, I just really don't like the song, versus the sentiment? I would like to think not too many are against the sentiment.
I think the sentiment that they're probably against is the idea that the national anthem is not being played.
Sure.
I think that's the sentiment that they reject, not necessarily the sentiment of the song.
Yeah.
But if you reject the sentiment of this, by insisting on the national anthem, you're essentially rejecting the sentiment of the song.
Yes. Well, look, like I said, we can talk about the education system. We'll be having long conversations about the anthem, I guarantee you. Guaranteed.
You can be sure about this, and it's interesting, Joe. In the 1930s, Cormac Moore's written a book about this. The soccer split between North and South was nearly fixed in the early 30s, and it came down essentially to a dispute over which Alcadoos would sit on the international board, and it all fell apart when it was very close to a deal. So this idea of accommodation is real, and why is the rugby team able to field on a united basis despite everything? And what it essentially comes down to is a lot of people were willing to swallow hard and make compromises and do things that must have stuck in their gullet to allow this to happen. Both sides. And in the projection, in that it is a projection of national success and how unity might work.
Yes.
But it does demand compromise.
Your reflections on women and modern Irish sport, when given a week ago, the female GAA players of the country came forward and said, well, we've had enough of this, and integration needs to happen quick, smart, or certainly money needs to be made available as a show of good faith if integration is going to take the 5 or 10 projected years. So on the one hand, it seems like we've seen extraordinary progression, and yet it's not moving nearly fast enough either. That, I think, would be the general refrain on where we are.
So I know I'm meant to be on here plugging my own book, but I'd like to plug a different book if I could. Emer Ryan's new book on being a woman in Irish sport is brilliant, and I really wished I'd read it before training the girls' minor team that I have in Plunkett now, and I've taken them from 6-year-olds up to 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
So it's 12 years basically of this, and I really wish I'd read it, because it gave such a fundamental insight into the practical experiences of the differential in gender treatment in the country, extending back over the last 30 years. And what we have here is the legacy of overt discrimination, which continues. It's got much better. To argue otherwise doesn't make sense. But the idea that you could fix more than a century of overt discrimination, which was reflective of broader discrimination in society, but possibly because of the physical nature of sport and everything around it, was even worse, and its clubbability and its associational nature was appalling in sport. And the idea that you could fix something like that in as short order as a few decades, this will be another half century in the turning. And that's a brutal reality for anybody who wants to seriously consider sport in the country. Now, I would be really insistent on this, that the divides in gender must be considered, but they cannot be considered also in isolation, because the divides in class in this country and access to sport rooted around ideas of class are also enormous.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it does strike me when it comes to sport that the girl and boy in the wealthy area and the girl and boy in the lower class, less wealthy area, the girl and boy in the wealthy area have a lot more in common than the two girls and the two boys in terms of their access to sport and their likelihood to participate in sport from this point on, certainly.
And we know this from really detailed studies produced by the Irish Sports Council, Sport Ireland, and this detailed look at what happens to working class participation in sport, but what even happens to access to facilities in sport, the distribution of money by the state to fund facilities, even something as basic as the facilities available to primary schools in the country, the gross disparity between wealthy areas and poorer areas. And I say this as someone who lives in the north inner city and can see on a daily basis the manner in which working class kids are discriminated against in this data, and all of the stuff that goes around it. And again, you need money to be able to play sport. It's not just having the money to join Royal Dublin or to buy a pony or to do whatever you want to do on that. We understand that. But you need money to be a member of a GAA club. That's a simple fact. You need to buy gear. You need to be able to pay the membership. You need to be able to run through it. And you could say, okay, maybe between everything, I might get boots. You might buy boots and you buy a hurley and you buy a helmet. You've got to travel to matches. You have to buy the gear. You have to pay the membership of the club. And there's always a few more pounds spent everywhere. To deny that is really hard. And there was a lot of people who are really struggling, and they do not have it. Even for people who are in a middle band at the moment, they feel the outgo of that money. Now, you find it if you can, but to pretend it doesn't matter, to pretend that sport is classless, is utterly dishonest, and we lie to ourselves when we do that. And we lie about our own failures when we do that.
I think that's very true. And not least in very high profile sports like soccer, where probably a majority of the players who are uber famous and reach the upper echelons are working class. It's easy for us to indulge in that lie. But it's not the truth. They are really the exceptions.
Yeah, and we also, Joe, in the Gaelic Athletic Association, like to pretend that it's a classless organisation. But that's just simply not true.
So we can't. I mean, we could talk. When we're talking about modern sport, it's such a broad topic. There was something I was curious to get your thoughts on. It's less specifically Irish, but I guess, given the nature of teams we support and just how international the world is, the complication of watching sport now, like never before, is staring us starkly in the face. So, as of 2014, to put it into context, the PIF, the Saudi PIF, is investing in making foreign investments. Been around since the 70s, but it's only the last decade it's made foreign investments. And straight away, has looked at sport and hoovered up what they could get. And the viewing experience for all of us has never felt more complicated, and it's never felt less likely to improve, I would think. I'm curious for your thoughts on just the weirdness of these states, rogue in certain instances, owning teams and running sport.
Okay, so what's happening with Saudi Arabia is fascinating to watch. I know there's a report, or the deposition before the Senate yesterday, saying that, well, actually the PGA Tour retains a majority voting, and the new vehicle that now will control world golf, therefore everything is fine. This is nonsense. Saudi Arabia have bought the world golf. Essentially, they have bought it.
Yeah.
And they bought it for, considering the amount of money, more than $500 billion in that fund. They bought it for what, $3 billion?
2, I think.
Yeah, like not bad. Not a bad investment for having something there. And they're in talks over tennis. There's talks that there's speculation that they tried to buy Formula One and are about to come back for more. They've already built the track, which opened a few years ago for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. They've pushed in and bought Newcastle, as you know, in the Premier League. It is as inevitable as night follows day that there will be PIF ownership of a major American sporting franchise soon enough. So the question is why? And the easy answer is that this is sports washing, and it's about an attempt to disguise the violent or repressive or aggressive natures of the regime. I don't really think that that's what it is.
It's 100% not.
I think in fact it achieves the opposite of that.
I knew very little about Qatar until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think what it does is it draws people's attention to those things, and it shines a light into those places. Like, would anyone have known about the treatment, for example, of migrant labour and the position of the indentured workforce in those places? So you have to think, what is it about? And obviously it is about geopolitics. It's about the positioning of the tilting the world's axis to say the American century is done, and that the important area in the world is shifting in a particular way. And okay, India is the most populous country in the world, and there's a vast Chinese economy, but we're unbelievably wealthy here, and we will play on the world stage. So I think that matters. Number 2, I think it's to do with the construction of a vast world of tourism and service industries that are based loosely around sport, but are mainly about leisure and culture. And the idea that we will reinvent ourselves for a post-carbon age, which is coming. Ultimately, it may take decades yet, but it's coming, and that source of Saudi wealth will become greatly diminished in its importance. So that's what PIFs are for. They're there to invest in a future, and it is but one of the Saudi investment fund is just one of many investment funds going around, as we know, including from the Norwegians, and everyone has them. But the manner in which they have gone after this, so there is a question though: will they lose interest? Will they see that they won't get a return on money in this? Because it's not too long ago that the Chinese were thought that they would push into soccer, produce all these soccer players, win the World Cup within 20 years, and had its plan, and that's kind of gone.
True.
So there's no inevitability in here, and what we do know is it does take consistency of application. But if you look at the manner in which they're approaching it, it really is in the longer term that they're going at. And look at the changes in I like Newcastle United, the attempt to go after Newcastle United, how long that took, and what they've done since getting it. It's been incremental in how they've gone at it, and I'd say the plan there is let's try and win the Premier League within 5 years.
And where does that leave Paul from Offaly, who wants to just have a beer and he supports Newcastle and just really wants to watch Newcastle but doesn't know where to sit with all this?
I think people have always made compromises around sport. They will continue to make compromises around sport, and was funny. I did this again thing with a group of second year. I teach a course called Sport in the Modern World in UCD, which is basically history of the modern sporting world and a global context. And I asked the students this year, there was about 75 of them in the lecture hall, and I asked them who thought it was wrong that the World Cup was played in Qatar, and about 3/4 of students voted that it was wrong that it was being played there. And I asked who wasn't going to watch it.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that sport just transcends all of these issues, all of these things that people come to accommodations with themselves. It doesn't mean though that they endorse what's happening.
Correct. We're pretty much out of time, and like there were a whole array of other things I wanted to talk to you about, from like the Lofty and doping in sport, and there's an enhanced games project on next year. Have you seen this in Australia, to have like take what you want, let's just see who can run the fastest and whatever drugs you can get your hands of, from the Lofty to the importance of the pool table in Belfield. So I'm not going to get time to do all that, but do you want to give us a final thought on sport's place in modern Ireland and where we are in 2023 when it comes to our love of sport and sport's place in our lives?
I think the way I'd end it is that what I've written about is just my experience, but sport is deeply personal onto each individual. So how I see sport and how I experience sport is entirely different than yours, or maybe shared characteristics, but in the round yours is totally different, and so on across everything. And what is clear though is that for every society for which we have a record, sport was central to it. There will be a sport out into the future, and from everything we know about the human condition, people will be interested in sport, and the manner in which the sport world continually changes will create new possibilities, new interests, new avenues. If you think, for example, I go back to the early 80s in Offaly watching sporting competitions there, but now the limit of what I could watch was enormous. I'd never seen American football, I'd never seen baseball, I'd never seen basketball, none of these sports, never saw them. And then what I can do now is, wherever I am in the world, if I've got the money, I can buy the app, I can watch all of those sports, not just the odd game. I can watch every single game in the NFL next autumn. I can do the same with basketball. Watch them day after. I can spend all my days watching basketball. And it comes down to Bill Rasmussen was the guy who founded ESPN in 1979. Now, Bill Rasmussen was laughed when he said he was going to put ESPN on all day and all night for 365 days of the year. He was mocked. People said there's not a chance of this. And Bill Rasmussen said, no, there is an insatiable appetite for sport in America. And he was proven right. By the end of the 80s, so within 10 years, he was showing live NBA matches, live NFL matches, but had constructed a whole world around the draft, around the Hall of Fame, around museums, adding to it then documentaries, books, and later a website. And the proof of his words are real. And what has happened now is that it's gone from the screen in the corner of your room, as it was in the 1940s. So there were 15,000 televisions in America in 1945, and then it began to spread, just went everywhere. So that was transformative with satellite coverage from the 1960s. Then it went to dedicated sports channels, and now every single screen. There is no event in this world now that cannot be live tweeted, that cannot be shown by any sports organisation using basic technology that you can buy for a couple of $100 and broadcast your game. You and me set up the News Talk Tiddlywinks Federation, and we put that live stream it, and we can do it. So this has created an incredible diversity of opportunity, of viewership, and of engagement. As ever, fascinating talking to you about a whole array of different things. Thanks for having me in, Joe. The very best of luck with the book. Sport in Modern Irish Life by Paul Rouse is very much on sale and in all good bookstores now. Thanks, Paul.